From the bizarre cars of Pimp My Ride to iconic sets, characters and cartoons, you can instantly tell when a show's from the 2000s. But why is that? And what changed? To get some answers, I had to go back to a very different time for television, when things were allowed on screen that would destroy careers today. I uncovered some pretty unexpected stuff, and there's a few shows that I'll never be able to watch the same way again, but here we go. Kick back and get some snacks, because we're about to go way back to try and find out why. There are only a few TV shows that are getting an entire section, and this is one of them. If you can't tell why, you're in for a wild ride, because it's time to talk about cars. But first, I want you to picture your dream car. Doesn't matter if it's an AU Falcon or a McLaren. Maybe even drop a comment about it. Now, I'm no mind reader, so I can't guess what car you're thinking of exactly, but I can tell you that absolutely none of you are picturing something like this. However, for a very brief chapter in history, thousands of people's dream cars were heavily modified beasts with flame decals and chunky gold rims. If you weren't big into the car scene, you might have only been exposed to this through Pimp My Ride, one of the biggest and most bizarre shows from the 2000s. We'll dig into that soon because there's a term we need to get familiar with first. Sex spec. It's not a brand of glasses, but it is the name for the hotted up Nissans, Toyotas, and Hondas from the 2000s. It describes over-the-top customization. Things like nitrous, stickers and Xboxes in glove boxes, people pop locking to subsonic subwoofers and not stock hydraulics. You can think of it as the modern version of 50s hot rods, only with a much lower barrier to entry and, consequently, some much more varied results. Everyone was competing to have a more outrageous sound system than the next guy. I don't even know what part of the car I'm looking at here. It's like a 1960s Batmobile. Anyway, it's clear that this trend was pretty significant, even if somewhat niche. It would, of course, start to break into the mainstream in the mid-2000s, which can be attributed to a couple pieces of media. Firstly, Fast and Furious. This put a spotlight on the growing car mod scene of the 90s and caused irreparable damage to thousands of Honda Civics. By the time Tokyo Drift was released, it was already too late. In the world of video games, you could see this style reflected as well in Need for Speed Underground and various other 2000s races. The main focus was on Japanese performance cars for a pretty simple reason. They were relatively affordable, powerful, and customizable. Even today, aftermarket kits and parts are readily available for so many models. The potential to squeeze an extra 100 horsepower out of your Honda's B16 and slap on some gold rims was both enticing and in many cases entirely achievable. Not that performance mods took priority, of course, as you'll soon come to find out. And that brings us to Pimp My Ride. Produced by MTV from 2004 to 2007, Pimp My Ride operated with a fairly simple premise. American rapper Xzibit would go to your house, tell you your car was a piece of shit for 15 minutes, then reveal it was getting pimped. They'd usually pick cars that were run down or on their last legs to make the transformation look more impactful. Now, I can't explain how badly I wanted one of these things. I would have done anything for Xzibit to come and put an Xbox 360 in the boot and a 20-inch sub. Some of the modifications were just outright insane though. In one episode, they chucked 400 carats of diamonds onto a rotating hood ornament. We actually had our numbers guy crunch the numbers on this one, and it turns out that probably wasn't real. I think the best series of mods that were done were to this guy's van. The door doesn't open unless you win a slot machine, and there's a fucking grand piano inside it, just in case he wanted to, use his van. Looking back, you can clearly tell that Xzibit thought a lot of the mods were complete bullshit. Like, he knows that hood ornament is gonna be gone within a day.
400 carats of actual diamonds.
Come on, dude.
Today, he seems pretty keen to distance himself from the show and assume absolutely no responsibility for what happened to those cars. And to be honest, I can't blame him.
Did they even tell you anything about hey, this is what we're doing when we're fixing the car?
No, I was not responsible for none of that shit.
Either way, some of his reactions are pure gold.
Hooked you up with the real deal right out of this exhaust. With these, you can see for miles and miles to come. You can even see in the future with these things. And to see through them clearly, only thing you have to do is concentrate. Oh.
At the very least, Pimp My Ride would be tame enough to air today. The other MTV shows in this video? Definitely not. DVD menus. If you know, you know, and if you don't, it doesn't matter because I'm going to talk about them anyway. These used to be iconic, and not just because they were burned into your subconscious after falling asleep during a movie. Waking up to Shrek's menu was essentially a rite of passage. And this wasn't just films. DVDs for shows were filled with unique animations, hidden games, and Easter eggs, and about as much entertainment as the actual episodes. Of course, this all fell under bonus content. There was nothing like finding out you still had a bunch of deleted scenes, commentaries, and more to sift through. It felt like you were getting so much more value out of your purchase, and the feeling of exclusivity was a great way to encourage people to expand their physical collections. You weren't just buying access to the show, you were buying a bunch of cool extras that, at the time, were hard to find anywhere else. So why am I talking about DVD menus in this video? Well, they were an essential part of the TV experience at home that has largely vanished. With their Easter eggs and behind the scenes content, many acted as extensions of the shows themselves. And I can bet that a lot of you spent hours digging through various menus long after you'd finished your 5th rerun of The Mighty Boosh.
I got something to show you. I got a mangina!
I was gonna show a bunch of the most iconic menus here, but instead I want to put that question to you guys in the comments. Which DVD menu was the GOAT? From Hannah Montana to That's So Raven, you can spot a Disney Channel show from a mile away. Not only being iconic, they shared distinct visual characteristics that you'd only find in the 2000s. Sets were vibrant, clean and colourful, towing the line between remaining relatable and realistic and feeling like an exaggerated version of teen life. I'm from Australia and I didn't watch these shows too much, but I can't deny that they influenced my expectations for high school. Anyway, perhaps more iconic than the copy-pasted schools and stages was the fashion. Not necessarily for the right reasons though. Whether it was chunky belts, bizarre layering, or markers, it was rare to have a character that wasn't completely nerfed by their fit. I'm just gonna rapid fire some of the more interesting trends from the shows because explaining all of these would take an entire video. Jeans with skirts, this hat, insane layering, fur coats, Disney knees, sequins, weird belts, and neon clothing. I swear every school had a kid that would exclusively wear like fluoro green though, so I don't think all the blame falls on Disney here. Interestingly, the over-the-top pinks, sequins, and aesthetics of shows like Hannah Montana often overlapped with much larger cultural movements at the time. One of the more notable was... Remember when people used to deck their iPods out in rhinestones? What about when they dressed like this? Why was that and why did people stop doing it? Well, we like to talk about aesthetics on this channel and one of the biggest from the 2000s was McBling. Really quick, if you enjoy this kind of content or just grew up in the 2000s, make sure to subscribe and check out the Instagram. There's a lot more coming. So, McBling was heavily intertwined with things like reality TV and fashion. Let's talk about those and find out where it all came from. Because yes, there is a reason that people dressed like this. To start off, you can identify this style through a few key elements. Animal prints, hot pink, tracksuits, and brands like Juicy Hock Tour were all fashion staples. Even some fonts are associated with the aesthetic, with Candace, for instance, being used for Pimp My Ride. The name itself is a combination of Mc from McDonald's and bling. I'm not 100% sure why, but I assume it has something to do with the occasionally cheap look of flashy jewelry and rhinestones. Turning to TV again, shows like Bratz and their accompanying toy lines were doing numbers. The combination of designer bags, sunglasses, and halter tops was dominant aesthetically and financially. In truth, the influence was so strong that if you search up Y2K today, McBling is the only thing you'll really find, despite being quite distinct from the actual look of Y2K futurism. The latter, of course, was more shiny, chrome, and advanced looking, coming a bit before the boom of McBling in 2003. Another key factor behind the spread of this style was the nature of celebrities and the culture around them. People like Paris Hilton, Beyonce, and Britney Spears all helped drive the fashion forward and into the wardrobes of millions. So if this aesthetic was so popular, where did it go? I mean, people were not dressing like this in the 2010s. That's a whole other can of worms that I'm far from excited to cover soon. In fact, this early look was largely gone by 2008. The shows that featured it had peaked and slowed down, and so had the people wearing it. You can attribute some of its disappearance to things like the 2008 financial crash. The flashy, expensive clothing suddenly felt pretty out of place and borderline distasteful. Anyway, if you jump forward to the present day, it's safe to say that the style has had a pretty big comeback, largely thanks to its popularity on TikTok and online stores. Even though it's usually referred to under the umbrella term Y2K, it's interesting to see it do the rounds again, because the next thing we'll be covering is definitely not coming back, and you'll see why. I knew the buyer, I just needed the seller. So I stayed back and ran the tapes one last time. $11.50 the deal goes down. Bulk, 10% under market price. It had to be him, I just needed something. And then I saw it. Enhance. GAMERSUPPS. As expected, but it got better. Enhance again. Immediately, I placed an order. 1 tub of blowhole blast with code mint. Time to put him out of business forever.
And that's the bottom line, cause Stone Cold said so.
Jackass, X Games, and nu metal. If one thing was true about the late 90s and early 2000s, it was that everything was extreme, or at the very least, edgy. You could spot this in branding, music videos, and of course, TV shows. Things were significantly more unhinged. Programs pushed the boundaries of entertainment in a way that hadn't been done before or ever since. We'll go over some examples soon, but first let's talk about why. I have mentioned this trend before, as it was kind of mirrored in video games, but we've never really gone into quite that much depth. Broadly speaking, there was a shift in the late 90s, especially in youth culture, towards being anti-establishment, rebellious, and over the top. This was propelled by things like the WWE, then called the WWF, which thrived on shock value and almost acted as a middle finger to those concerned about violent programming. Channels like MTV leaned into this even further, funding and producing content like Viva La Bam, Jackass, and Punk'd. These appealed directly to your stereotypical, edgy teenager frustrated with their parents and the status quo. At the same time, they were entertaining enough to attract massive audiences across all demographics. We'll look at these and their controversies soon, but essentially they were shows that your parents would feel guilty for enjoying and your younger siblings would watch from behind the couch. A lot of people have come to refer to this period as the Y2K Attitude Era, a time when theaters were filled with movies like American Pie, and television with shows like South Park and Jackass. The term originated from within the WWF, describing a run from 1997 to 2002 that was characterized by violent and risque content and anti-authority narratives. It was edgier and more raw than previous eras, and saw the creation and rise of some of the industry's biggest wrestlers. The Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Triple H all became pop culture icons, setting the stage for the WWE we know today. But like I said, wrestling wasn't the only scene that embraced this. If you've seen this logo more times than you can count, you can guess where we're stopping next. From Punk'd to MTV Cribs, there was one American cable network that stood out from the rest. It arguably defined an entire generation, platformed some of the most iconic personalities the world had ever seen, and left us with a legacy that was just as confusing as it was legendary. I mean, how many of these shows were actually real, and where is MTV today? We'll get into the juicy bits soon, because first I need to take you back to 12:01 AM on the 1st of August, 1981. MTV launches with the hit single Video Killed the Radio Star. On this day, they became the
world's first 24-hour stereo video music channel.
While that seems relatively insignificant now, it's hard to overstate the huge effect that this would have on music and its culture. For instance, it was no longer enough to just make a good song and hand it over to the radio. Putting music videos in the spotlight put the artist in the spotlight, specifically their fashion, visual storytelling, and creativity. And the impact of this was instantly clear. Thriller was released in 1983, raising the bar for what music videos could be. The meta was changing, and it wasn't going to be patched until update 2005.012. Anyway, the important thing about MTV was that it appealed to the youth. It offered teenagers two of their favorite things in one neat little package: music and television. Going further, it wasn't as formal as traditional radio stations, being more rebellious, shocking, and exciting. This set the stage for what it would eventually become and what most of you will remember it for. Because the next chapter was the 90s, and things started to get a lot more chaotic. Now, at this time, MTV was already a huge commercial success, but they wanted to try something different. You started to see them release actual shows. Beavis and Butthead, The Real World, and most of these did pretty well, a trend that continued until the mid-2000s. So let's talk about one of the biggest. It also happens to be one of the more controversial, but perhaps not for the reasons you'd expect. We've all seen MTV Cribs. Doesn't matter if you watched it when it was released in 2000 or on YouTube 12 years later. You might remember everyone's house kind of looking like this. Or perhaps significantly more chaotic. It was really only Steve-O's house actually, but anyway. The premise was fantastic at face value. You get a celebrity, go to their house and see whatever weird shit they were spending their money on. Steve-O had like a mini skate park in his apartment and a master set collection of bodily fluids on his floor. Others were a lot more tame, but some had a completely different problem. That being, they weren't actually their houses. You might have heard bits and pieces about this before, but the true extent of it is pretty hilarious. The fact is, a lot of these were just random places rented specifically for the show. The Yin Yang twins had a house packed with coastal themed decor, model ships and bizarre appliances. JoJo filmed the show while not even having a house at all. Nothing, even down to the Ferraris and Lamborghinis in the driveways, was safe. A lot of those too were simply rentals. If you have any doubts, all you need to do is look at the episodes that were real. Chris Pontius was probably living out of a van. Redman was rubbing two wires together to make his doorbell work, and his cousin was just sleeping on the floor. I still don't really get why they had to fake so many of them. I feel like the actual reality of people's situations tended to be far more interesting than the extravagant rentals. Then again, celebrity culture in the 2000s was a whole different beast. Things like tabloids and reality shows thrived on the concept that they lived in unreachable luxury and were almost alien when compared to your average person. As a result, it didn't fit the narrative to show a famous singer living in a house just like yours. Today, the public definitely places a little more value on being authentic and humble about success. That said, I think a modern day equivalent of MTV Cribs could be pulled off. But I can't say the same for a few of their other shows. Wild Boys, Viva La Bam. There's a near zero chance that these series could exist today, for reasons that I've alluded to throughout this video but never gone into. They rejected the clean, luxurious celebrity culture of the 2000s and ushered in a new era of entertainment, one that was far wilder than anything before it. I don't even need to talk about these stunts in detail when the names speak for themselves. Poo Cocktail Supreme, Beehive Limo, Wasabi Snooters, Toy Car, those who know. I'm pretty sure these guys are the reason that the phrase "don't try this at home" was invented. The Jackass crew was on camera non-stop for like half a decade. I'd say Steve-O is the most visually documented person in history, but I've spent enough time on the internet to know better. Or know worse in this case. Either way, the impact these guys had on the look of TV and the internet was ridiculous. You can find pieces of them echoing through the archives of YouTube pranks, movies, and early internet culture. Going further into aesthetics, this era of shows had a very specific visual style. It was, of course, reminiscent of skate parts, having a grungy, down-to-earth look and snappy cuts and handheld camera work. It felt like you were there, in the action, without the bells and whistles of a traditional set. This rawness was its secret sauce, allowing them to capture moments that felt authentic and edgy, again appealing to the youth culture at the time. What did 2000s cartoons look like? Is there really less variety today? And has animation fallen off? Well, they definitely looked different. From the scratchy imperfections of Rugrats' hand-drawn line work to the clothing textures in Chowder, you saw a wider variety of techniques being used to create a wider variety of shows. You can attribute some of this to the fact that many were still using traditional methods of animation in the early 2000s. The first season of Spongebob, for instance, used hand-painted cells. This gave it a distinct, stylized look. For mainstream television channels like Cartoon Network, there simply was more experimentation and less consistency in the visual style of programs. Compare Courage the Cowardly Dog to Samurai Jack, and then look at their selection today. They are by no means bad shows, but they seem to hardly differ aesthetically. The lines are all sharp and clean, with solid blocks of colour. In comparison to the 2000s, they look kind of simplistic. So why is that, and where did all the other shows go? Well, in the 2010s, something called the Cal art style started to spread in animation. You can spot it in shows like Steven Universe, The Amazing World of Gumball, and Gravity Falls. Think exaggerated features, minimal shading and heads shaped like beans. This gave shows a uniform look and proved more efficient than traditional or hybrid techniques from the past. It also was just safer. A chunk of people will always find stylized shows like Courage the Cowardly Dog ugly, and CalArts is just less abrasive. There's fantastic shows in both camps though. This just partly explains why there's less visual variety on TV. So, has animation just fallen off then? I mean, this is Rugrats today. The answer to that is no. It's just moved. Primal, Arcane, Love, Death and Robots. People are still experimenting, only not on the traditional platforms. The guy who made Samurai Jack is still going strong, and there's plenty of variety even here on YouTube. While it's true that children's entertainment is dominated by cheap 3D slop, that's far from the case everywhere. But in a nutshell, that's why 2000s cartoons looked like that, and why they don't anymore. If you want to know why XTREME looks like that, check out this recent video with Casey Valentine from Deep Blue. Great channel. And guys, let me know where we should stop next. Maybe the 2010s, maybe the 1700s, or maybe your mum's house.